minutes to talk. So here are your 20 minutes. Make sure your microphone is on.
I think it's on.
Perfect. Great. Over to you. Good.
Thank you. Okay, so hi everybody. If I do sneeze during these 20 minutes, please excuse me. I am currently being assaulted by allergies. So I'm going to try not to sneeze. I've sneezed myself to death in the past half an hour, so hopefully that's done. I'm going to be talking about storytelling. More specifically, I'm going to give you a few hard facts and maybe some techniques to use storytelling in class. Just like Sean said, I did actually decide to draw all of my slides, and I'm going to tell you at the end why. So let's start this party, shall we? So obviously this is an understatement. Stories are old. You know, stories are all around us. You probably already use storytelling in class fairly often. I hope you do. I hope you'll use them more after this talk. But if you're not using it for your students, you probably use it with your family, or probably people around it use it with you. Stories are all around us, and when I say stories are old, I mean that stories are the oldest form of communication. Stories have been around for as long as as humans have, and in fact, most scientists believe that the change in our brains that allowed for stories to be created is the change that allowed us to become the humans that we know today. That also means that stories are universal. I mean, there's a lot of people in this chat room right now, and if I probably would ask each one of you to tell me about the stories that are part of your culture, so the bad guy in your culture or the good guy, or how many animals there are in various stories, we'll probably find that we have some common ground on that. I've found that having asked multiple people from multiple countries about their own stories, the traditional ones, the ones that were told to them by their grandparents, I found that there were stuff that were very similar to my own culture, which is completely different. And that is because technically, despite us being creative people, we all decide to kind of create stories in much the same way. And not only that, but we can definitely pinpoint places on the globe that share similarities. Like I said, the bad guy might have the same characteristics, or it might have the he might be doing the same action, so he might be bad in the same way. So that helps us in teaching, because stories are passed on from one generation to another. So why shouldn't we use stories in class to basically teach cultural knowledge, the knowledge that you can't necessarily teach with language, but you can definitely teach through a much wider context. So when I started using storytelling in class, initially I was all about, okay, we're going to use this storybook, what language can I teach? And after a while, and I mean a while that's maybe like a couple of years, I started thinking that that was useless. Not because teaching language through storybooks is useless, absolutely not, but rather I wanted them to get more. I was bringing in these beautiful books with great illustrations, with incredible messages, and I was simply looking at the past simple. It made no sense to me after a while. So I decided to use storybooks, yes, for teaching language, but also I was going to teach these kids stuff that was not part of their cultural, let's just say their culture, their traditions, their context. And so I started to research why use storytelling in class, and I have some hard facts for you. Now, our brain is actually built to process images 60 times faster than words. I'm gonna let that sink in, because the first time I read it, I was like, oh my God, it's literally like comparing a computer from 2018 to the first computers in the 80s. That's kind of like the same thing. So why are we so incredibly focused on looking at language teaching just through words? Looking at developing our students' language knowledge and developing their knowledge of the linguistical context just through words. I thought, no, there must be some other way, and what better way than storytelling, which is inherent to every single culture on the globe. Even more so, I started to ask myself, well, if that's the case, 60 times faster than words, then how does storytelling actually affect the brain? Okay, I'm just reading what Sean's. Okay. Neural coupling. Neural coupling. I'm sorry, I don't know why I must have did something odd here, but I'm going to show you. Neural coupling. I'd like you to imagine your students as light bulbs. And now imagine you're reading the story to your students, or you're showing the story to your students, or you are not even saying anything. They're looking at some pictures and they have to imagine the story. This is exactly what's going to happen. You are going to have completely different colors because your students will have completely different experiences despite being the same story. They're going to take it, filter it through their emotion and through their emotions, filter it through what they know about the world, filter it through their experience of the world. And what's going to come out is going to be all these different colored light bulbs staring back at you, each one having a completely different reaction to the story. Some of them are going to absolutely love it. Some of them are going to hate it. Some of them are going to think that they don't want to be in the room with you. And that's fine, because technically you are going to inspire even the ones that are going to say, oh no, this story is just not for me. And neural coupling is that phenomenon, the cognitive phenomenon that happens when students pick something that is being given to them and filter it through themselves, and out comes whatever they feel about that specific event. And I thought this was so interesting, and it happens much more when the brain is stimulated through images. Now, the other thing that's going to happen is mirroring. Your students might react differently to the story, but at the end of the day, they're all going to be experiencing the same activity. So you're going to have all of your students basically light up. It doesn't matter, they're going to be a different color. They're going to be engaged. And again, this is an attribute that storytelling has over and over again. I've been doing storytelling in class with classes as big as 25 for the past 3.5 years. And even the most unengaged, the most unimpressed, the most typical teenager out there has had some sort of a reaction, which is more to say than, much more to say than when I've been teaching them grammar, or even, you know, my all-time favorite, pronunciation. They do not have the same other types of teaching and other types of engaging with younger students does not garnish the same results. Now, that being said, I have tried storytelling in class with adults, and I have had very similar results as with children. Again, going back to the simple fact that storytelling is basically an activity that human beings experience with from birth to basically till we die. Because even if it is simple, like telling your coworker what you did over the weekend, that is still a storytelling activity, and it stimulates the same areas in the brain as a more complex story, such as Little Red Riding Hood or something like that. Now, I looked also when I was researching storytelling at the cortex activity, so how our brain is actually activated through storytelling. Now, maybe some of you have heard of Broca's and Wernicke's area. Broca's area is the one that is responsible for speech production, and Wernicke's area is the one that is responsible for speech comprehension. So basically, these are the two areas that should light up every single time you have a conversation with somebody. Now, if you close your eyes right now and you just listen to me, those are the two areas that you are going to, well, actually, you're going to have Wernicke being way more. And if you're saying something to yourself, then Broca is going to come in as well. Now, when you do storytelling, you also have the motor cortex, the sensory cortex, and the frontal cortex light up. Now, when I was reading all of this, I thought, how am I going to show people this so that it's actually, you know, interesting? I think most times when you read any sort of research paper, it's kind of boring. I don't know if it's just me. So I thought about showing you exactly where in your brain you get all of those pretty little areas. So we have this little blue one is Broca's area. That's the one that's going to light up every single time you say something. Currently, because I'm speaking to you guys, mine is like, you know, going crazy right now. Now, that orangey one is Wernicke's area. So if you're listening to me right now, that one is working overtime trying to keep up with the crazy things I'm saying. But if you're doing storytelling, then your brain is going to look like this. Your brain is going to be on fire. You're going to have Broca's area because you're probably going to be asking me crazy questions. You're going to have Wernicke's area because you're listening to me. You're going to have the sensory cortex because you're probably going to be moving around or at least twisting your head to see the images better. You're going to have the motor cortex because I'm going to ask you to move around, sit up. I do an activity when I do the Emperor's New Clothes where we pretend to put on clothes and walk around, and I can like imagine my students' motor cortex just light up. You'll have the visual associative cortex, again, through the fact that you're asking them to imagine scenes. And so they're actively trying to envision the next part of the story or how exactly it ties in with the picture they saw before. You're going to have the judgment and reflection because, again, you might like it or not like it. You might ask your students to think what's going to happen next. And so they're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have the creative thought area that's going to light up because they're going to, again, be maybe making hypotheses about what's going to happen next or not. And my favorite area, the red one, is fear. I really love getting some scary stories in classrooms, especially with the teenagers, and making it particularly scary with turning the lights off and, you know, like moving stuff around. So, but that's just me. Now, obviously, you're going to say, okay, fine, you have all of these things, but how, you know, like, why is it relevant to us and how can we use it in class? Well, the first piece of advice that I can give you is choose wisely. Now, a lot of people keep telling me that I should definitely stick to easy books, avoiding tenses that students don't know. And I keep ignoring them because I do believe that it's not necessarily the language that's the first thing that's going to hit the students, but rather the message. So bringing a more complex book into class because it has a very powerful message, great illustration, and you know you're going to be able to work on the language later on is not the right thing to do. I'm actually an original. I go original most of the time. I use books that have been written for the sake of them, not necessarily for the language. So I'm a big fan of Julia Donaldson. If you don't know who she is, you need to find out immediately. And so by saying choose wisely, I would say don't underestimate your students. They're much more capable to understand than you give them credit for. Like I said, the brain is going to help the fact that the words are not helping. So we're going to have the visuals that are going to like explain the meaning to the students. Also, please don't tell your students the stories that you want to hear. Take that with a pinch of salt. What I mean by that is you might find it interesting. It might be interesting, but it might not. So take into consideration the students you have in front of you. Do choose stories you do enjoy telling, on the other hand, because if you're going to go in there with something that is boring for you or uninteresting, or you're not going to, for example, unfortunately, my accent doesn't allow me to go in and do a lot of like British thing. I sound really weird when I try it, so I have to choose the book and then try to say it with my own accent. So I tend to go with stuff that is more neutral rather than having expressions that I don't necessarily know how to pronounce correctly. And do adapt. By that I mean bring in a difficult book, but obviously you don't necessarily need to use the words that you think are difficult. Just read it and gap it. Just skip over anything you feel is too complicated for your students. Just help yourself. Now, PowerPoint is like the easiest way to present stories. Scan your book or take pictures of your book, put it as a PowerPoint, use animations. I use special effects, and by that I mean sounds. Findsounds.com has free sounds for everybody. You can download anything, literally, from a drop of water to, I don't know, drums. And use books that have been adapted to film or video, something like The Gruffalo, something like The Snowman, something that you can then maybe, again, exploit the fact that our brains appreciate the visual and have a movie day, movie night, movie afternoon, movie morning with your students. Doll yourself up. When I was preparing the slides, I was like, okay, how am I going to explain this to people? It's not you being the monkey, if that's what you think, but rather, oh my God, have a puppet with you. A puppet is another proficient user of the language in the classroom. I mean, you can have full conversations with puppets. It's really relatable for younger learners. It creates a genuine information gap. You can actually, like I said, have a conversation, hence they don't know what the conversation is going to be between you two, and can be shared. I've brought in multiple puppets in classrooms, asking students to talk to each other using the puppets. It's really, really useful for those shy students. It's useful for disabled kids. It's useful for kids that have dyslexia, dysgraphia, because there's nothing to read. It's something that they have to act out. So I've found that it's really reassuring for those kids. But I have had classes of adults have fun with my puppets. So it's fairly universal. And also, please, it does not require special puppet skills. Don't think you have to change your voice. I can't do voices. So it's like me, and then the puppet has the exact same voice. I'm like, sometimes I can, but most of the times I can't. Folkmanis.com is a really great site. You can find lots of puppets. Give it structure. Now, I'd like you to imagine this dragon without a head or a tail. Now, you're not going to like that dragon. It's not going to look like a dragon. So, build trust. It's a process. Storytelling is a process. You need to build trust. You need to go from familiar to unfamiliar. So maybe do some stories that students are going to find easier to comprehend, and then go to something more crazy. Go hard or go home. And by that I mean, if you do it once, you need to do it more than once, or else it won't stick. The unknown creates a need to know. So don't worry if it's difficult in the beginning. It's going to get easier, and your students will appreciate the challenge. Longer storybooks, just break them up. Think like TV series. You want to have episodes. Now, the happily ever after is asking your students to become the storytellers. There's a beautiful, beautiful, I can have a couple more minutes. Sean just told me. I'm so happy. There's a beautiful workshop kind of course that Pixar and Khan Academy have created. It's completely free. That's the link for it. And it's really, really easy for you or your students to do. It can be set up as a flipped classroom kind of activity. It's beautiful, and it does encourage storytelling skills, which can then translate into presentation skills and more practice with speaking, more practice with listening. So truly, you can use it in any direction. Do you know who that little guy is? That little blue guy? No? Nobody? Chat box? Anybody? No? It's a pigeon. Yeah, it looks like a pigeon. Very funny. Yes. A Storybird. Yes. Storyboard.com. They call it a language arts tool. I absolutely adore it. I use it as inspiration. They do insist that that's their point on the web, that they use illustrations to inspire members to write stories. The stories that are there can be read, so it can be used as a reading tool. It's beautiful. I've never had a student who, upon seeing what the amazing illustrations that are on this website, couldn't produce at least one story. So, and finally, have you heard of Storyboard That? StoryboardThat.com is a graphic organizer that helps you to pre-visualize the story. Again, it gives you the tool, well, you and your students, the tools to create these storyboards with images and with words, so that it then makes it easier for you to create a full story. You can also use it to create animation. You can use it just as a starting point for stories in the classroom without any writing. So it's a really simple way of bringing stories into classroom, maybe post having listened to an actual story from a storybook. So, any questions? I think I went really fast through that, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can find me at the Sound Eater on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. On Instagram, you can find most of the images that I used today and some more. You can find me on my blog, thesoundeater.blogspot.et. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you really liked it. I hope you took something away from it and you're going to do storytelling in class on Monday.
Joy.
Is that okay, Sean?
I'm sure we all will. Fabulous. As I told everybody, they are beautiful slides, weren't they? That's it. We can all go home now. Our slides will never match that for the rest of the day. So I would say thank you very much, Oana. If you've got any questions for Oana, drop them into the chat box. I'm going to take her off microphone and camera now while we get the next person ready. Thank you so much for all the effort you put into that. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn everything off, eh?